Okay, so I've only seen one or two join in the last minute or so, so we're going to assume that everybody that wants to be here is here. First of all, I want to give my appreciation to everybody for attending today. I know that the world is kind of in a little bit of an unusual place because of events that are outside of our control, and hopefully we can talk about some topics here and maybe provide a little bit of guidance that can help each of us do our part to help our businesses move forward in these uncertain times. My name is Bill Cage. I'm a Senior Vice President of Delivery and Solutions for ERPA. Most of you probably are aware of who we are as a company. I have a slide all the way at the end that I'll put up that gives some more information about who we are and what we do and that sort of thing. I presume that if you got the meeting invite that you're probably at least somewhat familiar with what we do. What we have found ourselves in discussing internally about what do we do to deal with some of the issues that are introduced as we go into various states of social distancing and work from home and that sort of thing. And we had discussions internally at ERPA about how do we deal with that ourselves. And we started to think that maybe this is something that would benefit others to gain some insight into these things. And we made a decision to do that, and this webinar is a part of that. We also will talk at the end of some other things that we're doing really complementary out to the community at large to try and be helpful. We do believe firmly as a company that it's time for us, in these times, it's time for us to pull together and get through these things. So hopefully you'll find the webinar valuable, and then you'll also take a look and see if some of the complementary services that we're providing, if those could be helpful for those of you that are having some challenges in that area. So the agenda is pretty brief. The introduction, which I'm doing right now, we're going to talk really quickly about what the goals are that we hope to help you with as we get through the webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about what business continuity is, and there's a little bit of confusion out there, particularly as you talk about disaster recovery as well. So I'll talk about that. And then the meat of it is it's a thought process for building a business continuity plan. Building a business continuity plan is fairly involved, so we're not going to do that. But what we hope to do is be able to give you some things to think about that you can go back into your own businesses and use that thought process to start to develop things that are going to help you make it through until we kind of get back to more of a normal operating presence. So the goal, like I said, the first thing is to introduce some of the thought processes. We certainly are not going to be able to craft a plan as a part of a single webinar. That's just not, that's not realistic. But hopefully this is going to arm you with enough so that you can lift it off the ground and start to move that forward. These tactics we talk about are going to let you take that back and start that. And the reason for the title of this, In a Pinch, is really to give the clue to everybody that this is targeted toward people that are trying to put something together without the benefit of time and resources and things like that to go through a full-blown plan. But you do need to make sure that your business can continue to move forward through this period of disruption. The last bullet here, the exercise of planning, is sometimes as valuable as the plan itself. That's really true, and particularly given that what we're talking about here is a thought process. We're not talking about the outcome. And we'll go through some examples and some specific tasks to take back and work through. And what you'll find if you do that is that process of actually working through those exercises and and the thought process will get you to think in a certain way and will be helpful for you to go through and be able to deal with these things. I'll talk in a few minutes about plans. Any plans are subject to change once you start to have to apply them, and it's certainly true with business continuity. Now, I mentioned that a definition about business continuity. A lot of times, what you'll see out there is people lump disaster recovery and business continuity together. You'll see a lot of times DR, BC, and things like that, and they do naturally go together because there's not really a reason to do a business continuity plan unless there's some level of disruption. But disaster recovery is not business continuity. If you think about disaster recovery, it's all about the physical aspects. It's about building out the business. It's about repairing things that have been damaged. And the examples that I threw up is rebuilding a building. When you think about disaster recovery, you think about hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and things like that do physical damage to locations. Floods. A lot of times people don't consider floods. They say I'm out of the floodplain, and then they have a data center that that requires cooling, and they end up having a situation where their fire extinguishers deploy and things like that. Anyway, that's about disaster recovery. It's about fixing those things, implementing new solutions, and that sort of thing. Business continuity is about making sure during a period of external disruption that the business itself can continue to perform and provide the services that your customers depend on, and quite frankly, stay in business. The last line down at the bottom is key, and I'll talk about that throughout. Disaster recovery is about making the business whole, and then business continuity is about keeping the business viable. You want to be able to pop out of the other side of whatever the disruption is and still be in business. And depending on the level of disruption, that can be a challenge. And so there's certain things that you need to do to be able to go through and ensure that when you get to the other side, that there's another side for you to be at. And I don't want to sound that stark, but it is something that you need to pay attention to, and you need to take that in and understand. It's not about making the business whole, and sometimes you'll get trapped a little bit. And as we start to define a business continuity plan, the first thing that we're going to do is have an exercise that says, how do we define a business that is going to allow us to keep our organization viable. So keep that in mind. And then just the pure definition, business continuity, as the name implies, is the process of ensuring that a business continues to function during a period of disruption, keep the business viable. So we'll stick with that. Where are your organizations, and I'm asking this rhetorically, right, in creating a business continuity plan? Half jokingly, the steps on the left side, can you repeat the definition? In other words, you really have never considered this. It's not been something that came onto your radar. And to be quite frank, it doesn't really until there's an event like this. I know my experience, and I'll talk a bit about that as we go on, really came about with 9/11. I was working for an organization in Manhattan. Although we were not, we were in Midtown and not in downtown, where obviously the 9/11 incidents occurred. The whole of Manhattan all of a sudden had a wake-up call and said, we have to figure this stuff out. So I'll talk about some of the things that that came from that experience, and things that you can take away, hopefully, and apply to your own experiences. So the first thing, you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't really thought about it. Other people have put some thought into it, but they haven't really gone and put it down on paper and made it formalized. The next one is where maybe you formalize something in your thought process and maybe documented something, but you haven't really gone and exercised it and said, you know what, we need to treat this as a consistent part of our ongoing business. It's not, it's not something that we do as an exercise and then just, put it on the shelf and then walk away from it. Everything about your business changes. You need to have processes in place that allow you to go through and refine that, test that, and be comfortable with it. And then the last one is you've nailed this. You're doing all the right things. You're really not the right audience for this particular webinar if you're in that category. And to that point, the content is we're going to do a poll here in just a second. But the content for this webinar is really focused on this first group of people that have not had this as a part of their planning exercise, and then maybe some of those that put some thought into it, but you haven't really formalized it. So we do have a quick poll here. Maybe my guys can tell me. I think it's showing up on my screen. I assume that it is showing up for you. If you would, go ahead and select your answers to this. And please forgive me a little bit. I'm not used to the poll mechanism, so I may need to get a little bit of help from the people that are helping me with this presentation.
Yes, Bill, we see the poll question, and
Okay.
people are responding. So let's give it just a few seconds, and then we can take the poll off.
Okay. Well, let me know when to proceed. This is helpful for us just to understand the reach that we're going out to, and what this audience, what your experience is, and so let us know your thoughts here. Okay, is that enough time? So here's some points for consideration. I'll go through these pretty quickly, and these are just kind of sort of high level things to put into your head, and as you start to think about these things. First of all, there's no shortage of ways that your business can be impacted. And the point of this is don't spend any time at all thinking about what might impact you, because I can guarantee you, even a business that's sitting at the top of the steps that were on the previous slide, they didn't think about the impact of a novel coronavirus coming in and what that might do to us. So your likelihood of determining what those might be is really not the point of business continuity. What you need to do is focus on, what does your organization need to do if we don't have access to our building, or if our people have to work remotely, or those sorts of things. And what the cause of that is really not the point of the exercise. The other thing that you have to do is really true in today's environment, is you have to assume that others out there are impacted the same way you are. And so, a lot of times you may, as you start to build out a plan, and right now we're in the disruption, so it's a little bit different on the thought process. But as you start to think about this going forward, it's a little bit unique today in that you usually think, okay, well, if I need something, all my suppliers and my vendors that I require they're going to be available. So I just need to, put up a list and then go take action. This disruption is something that, that proves the fact that you have to anticipate that may not be the case. And so for a lot of things, certainly now, we collectively may be mostly working from home right now, but you have to anticipate that your suppliers are as well. That's important. I kind of mentioned this. This is a very famous quote from a I don't know what his title was, a soldier back in the 1800s, and he talks about the no battle plan survives the first contact with the enemy, and that is proven true universally. So it doesn't really matter how much you plan and how much you put it together. Once you have to start to execute it, there are going to be things that shift under your feet that you need to take care of, and you have to be very flexible with the plan. And I mentioned already that the process of planning is extraordinarily valuable, even if the plan itself is not. I'm not trying to say a plan is not valuable, but I'm saying that if you find that the plan changes, the way that you have to structure your thoughts is very valuable. And then also, if you haven't planned yet, you know what? Don't let that stop you. Yeah, and now's the time to kind of hoist yourself up and point in a direction and start moving. And then this last one is really more about as you come out. People that work with you on business continuity, and you'll, just like anything else, you'll notice that some people have a talent for it. And these are usually people that are good at thinking on their feet and thinking about how to circumvent problems rather than being consumed by them. Make them a part of your team going forward, but take notes about what works and what doesn't and that sort of thing as you go through this disruption. Now, what I'm going to do is, once I get the slide to go, is I'm going to walk through some steps that you should be taking particularly if you're operating from ground zero. I mentioned that this is about defining and building a business continuity plan for a viable business, not the whole business. Now, I'll say that sometimes the whole business is viable, so it doesn't preclude you from saying the entire operation has to move forward. But in most cases, it doesn't. I mentioned that, in 9/11, I was working for Time Warner, actually the Time Inc. division of Time Warner, which was, I think, Time Inc. has been sold since then, but it was the largest magazine publisher in the world at that time. People, Fortune, Sports Illustrated, obviously Time Magazine, and then, like I said, hundreds, not hundreds, but over 100 other magazines out there. Well, after 9/11, we sat down as a business and said, we see the risk, and we need to make sure that as an organization we're prepared for the risk going forward. So when we sat down and did this first step, what is it that we defined, that we said against all odds, no matter what happens, what is it that we're going to say we're going to ensure does not get disrupted? And for Time Inc., that determination was a single magazine. They said, you know what, Time Magazine, it was felt, held a special role in the world and in history, and it was published weekly, and the determination was that Time Magazine would be published every week, no matter what happens. And so that's how they defined it. And that, ultimately that meant that, more than 100 magazines in the case of a business disruption that caused us to have to go to a business continuity plan, were at risk of not having their needs met. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have their needs met. It just means as you start to make the decisions about how you deploy resources, which one gets priority. And in this case, it was, if everything got to the worst case scenario, then Time Inc. was going to go down to a single publication. Now, you may go in, and when you start to look at this, and you'll notice too, I mentioned that there's a time variable about this too, because you may look at it and say, well, a viable business for us for a 2-week disruption is very different than a viable business for us, for a 60-day disruption or a 6-month disruption. And so you should think about that. And it may be that rather than sort of, what Time Inc. found itself doing, um, it may be that you end up having a situation where you say, you know what, we can go for a period of time with largely the entire footprint, but if it continues for 60 days, then we're going to have to narrow the footprint to be able to keep a viable business. So keep that in mind, is that the approach here is not necessarily in your cases, it's not necessarily to skinny down the business up front and then maybe grow it later on. It may be that it stays largely intact with a plan to shrink it going forward. But this can be sort of harsh, and this may be the hardest thing for each of you to do. A lot of the rest of it is sort of paint by numbers as I go through it. This is really where you're going to have to sit down, and there are a lot of people that need to be involved. You need to have hard discussions, and it may require you to make some decisions that that are not comfortable. But it has to be made. These decisions have to be made against the backdrop of, if you don't do it, then what you may do is allow a disruption to end up determining whether your business is going to be viable long term. And ultimately, you want to ensure that when the disruption is over, that your business is not over, or your organization in the case of higher ed. I'll use the term business, but I think everybody understands that that's all inclusive. So hopefully everybody understands that process. And then the next thing that you have to do is go through and identify the core services that will be need to be performed to continue your business operations. And this is where it starts to get a little bit of what I was referring to as paint by numbers. Although you have to do some digging around, and you have to say, what is it that we have to have? So again, following with the case of Time Inc., and once they decided that we have to keep that Time magazine publishing weekly throughout this, then they had to sit down, or we had to sit down and say, well, what does it take to do that? And we knew that writers and photographers and editors and publishers and all of the staff for that magazine would have to have a place where they could work. And our assumptions were that that the business disruption was going to make it such that the existing facilities were not available to us. So then you go and say, all right, well, we're dealing with workspace, but how do you make sure that everybody has the right tools to be able to continue to do their job? And so you have to sit down and think, okay, well, in the case of Time Inc., we looked, and they, all of them needed workstations. They needed access to publishing specific software packages and things like that. They also needed access to external services like the printing. Printing of the magazines was something that was provided by a third-party business, that they pushed out. So we identified that, and then you go through each one of those and identify that, and then start to figure out, well, what does that mean? Well, this is about identifying the core services. And so the next thing, again, sort of a paint by numbers approach, and I encourage you to do the same thing, is that you have to say, well, what does it take to keep all those core services alive? If you're going to have employees, those are people that are going to want to be paid. Even for situations where employees are not going to be engaged during the period of disruption, it could very well be that your organization continues to pay those people. So to be able to pay employees requires supporting services. You may have that, as an external where you outsource that to some other vendor. You may be providing payroll services internally. What are those things that are needed? And then you have to think about, well, what do you do if they're not available? Payroll is a great example. We went through and, for our business continuity plan back then, we thought about it. We said, you know what happens if the payroll systems, which are not, which they are complex systems, so they're not something you can just flip on if your existing system is unavailable, which, there are tactics to be able to make sure that you're doing, things to have high availability and, lots of stuff that you can do. But what do you do if none of that works? And, we actually went through the process and we arranged with the banks that, that they would hold a payroll file from us that we would be able to telephonically tell them to rerun the last payroll. And we did that with the knowledge that it's not going to be perfect. A lot of hourly people and that sort of thing that, their hours varied and people are leave the company and come to the company. And so, but we sat and we went, you know what, if we get to that situation, that's our worst case situation. And we had a plan for that. Now, we obviously expected that we would never execute that, but that process, like I was talking about, of thinking these things through and saying, what would you do? What are the options out there? And then being very creative and saying, you know what, there is no way that in a normal situation, I would ever propose something like this. But that's really the point, right? Is that what we're talking about is what do you do in the abnormal situation? And so think about those things, just simply, which, more and more people, just staying with payroll, more and more people have gone to electronic deposits. And which from a business continuity standpoint for that one particular aspect is very enabling. But you might still print checks. You might still, from an accounts payable, you might still print checks. And how do you do that if people don't have access to the building? Well, we had the benefit of a shocking event that opened our eyes that really we weren't directly impacted, right? Our building and our environment and all were still intact, and so we were able to go through a thought process that was deep and make decisions without having to have the decision done by Friday, which is payroll. But what we did is we went out and we said, you know what, there are firms out there, that third party that you can go to where they can print checks for you and other things. And so we engaged those companies to as a part of our business continuity plan that in the event that were to happen, we had a way to print checks. These examples are not being given that they might be something that would be of value to you, but I hope that what you are taking away from this is that that's the way you have to think. You really do. You have to sit down and say, okay, what is it that we're trying to do to keep the business viable? What are the services that have to be out there to be able to do that? And then, and then what are the supporting services that make those happen? And then once you define all those, you need to go through the next step, which is to say, what do I do if those things aren't available? And any sort of a plan you need to think about, it's a plan is just a series of pre-made decisions. And for the most part, it's a plan is made with less constraints and less pressures than you will be finding, during a disruption. Now, for for where we are right now and kind of where things are going, that's not necessarily true. So that's why, again, the title In a Pinch. This is about what you need to be able to do to go through and figure this out. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, it's going to be something that is done during a period of disruption. And so the pressures are going to be there. So we'll have to work through those. The limited example actually is one I've been talking about kind of throughout. This is really about Time Inc. and what we went through. And I don't think there's anything new on this slide, so I'll go on to the next slide. But that's largely about Time Inc. and how we dealt with that and put together the plan. Now, how do you document this? And I laugh, and a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the consulting that I do with clients, I say, 90% of my job is stating the obvious. But that doesn't mean I don't have to go ahead and do that. It is a part of my job. And so this kind of falls into that category. I'm stating a bit of the obvious here. The plan document, when I have worked with organizations to go through this sort of an exercise, I simply, start metaphorically to some degree, but it's really actually accurate. You start with a blank sheet and you go through that exercise of let's define what a viable a business is, and write it down. And so that becomes again, metaphorically, the first page of the document. And now we all know that there's a lot more to that. But again, as far as a model to follow, it's a viable model. And then after that, you go through and say, for each of the core services that you define, write those down in a list, 1 to 100, whatever the case might be. And, again, I'm greatly oversimplifying it, but again, the structure works. And so for each one of those, you identify it, you make your rationale, you identify the pieces of it. And, so it's not just like a spreadsheet having single line items for that. You need to, it's a bit more nuanced. I don't think that anybody would think that, your ability to take care of employees can be summed up in on one line in a spreadsheet. That's not realistic. But for each one of those, if presumably you number them within that list, then you would have to identify the supporting services that go for those as well. And so for item number 1, the core services, you would then add pages for any supporting services that would go to that. And so if you think about that, for example, they have to have a workspace. As a core service, you've decided that, that your viable business is going to require people. I can't imagine a scenario that that's not the case, but you have to have a place for these people to work. To be able to have a place for people to work in the core services, you're going to have to be able to maybe not provide them a facility. I mean, a lot of people right now are working from home, and but facilities. If you throw that out, if that's a core service, then what does it take? What are the supporting services to keep a facility up and going? Well, you got to have power. You've got to have internet service. You've got to have various security service. Various things that would apply. So those would fall down in supporting services, and then you would just document those. And at the lowest level, you should go through and give specific instructions about how you're going to keep that or how you're going to obtain that in the event of a large disruption. So this is kind of what I was talking about, that if you go and you say, run with the example, you got to have people, and these people have to be paid, and you know what, there's some subset of people that need a paper check, then at that lowest level for this, you would go through and say, well, here are our options to provide a paper check. Maybe we move a check printer to some other location. In today's world, it might be something that you would consider saying, you know what, we're going to pick up the check printer and we're actually going to drop that over at the payroll manager's garage, and we're going to connect them up through the internet so that they can run paychecks and have them delivered to the payroll manager's garage, and that person would print those out and put them in the mail from their home. That's the sort of thoughts that you have to go through, and there's a lot of that. And so again, the biggest thing is getting accustomed to this thought process, and these need to be updated, right? You need to be able to understand, do you have a contract for services? We're all on GoToMeeting right now, and and everybody's using Zoom and Ring Central and things like that to do collaborative work. As an organization, do you know what your contract is for that? Are there limits on your capacity for that? Is there a renewal for that that's coming up? If you're subscribing to one and there are issues, do you know what your other alternatives would be? Those are the sorts of things that you want to, and especially right now, as you want to start to think about that and say, how do we deal with that? So, we've been talking a bit about, a remote workforce. And so I threw a couple of slides in here with just some tables that we, routinely use. And we'll provide this document out. And we're also building some additional materials that we're putting on our website that we'll put out there for you to download that hopefully can help you. But in this one, if you're going to have to transition to a remote workforce, a lot of businesses right now are very accustomed to that. And they may not do it in a large scale fashion, but I would say it's almost every business has somebody that's working remotely, and so there's some level of capacity and some level of acceptance of that. But now all of a sudden it's ramped up, and just saying, the government or other organizations, health organizations, making a proclamation that says we're all going to work from home doesn't magically mean that you're going to be able to pull that off real easily. So those things that I was talking about before, we'll talk about again in a second. But the first thing that you need to do is you need to look at your personnel, and at some roles, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to work remotely. A lot of them you can, a lot of them, everything in the spectrum is going to be out in front of you in this regard. But what you have to do is just do the dirty work, build a table similar to what's displayed here, and capture that information and say, who are they? What are they doing? Do they have to be on site? And maybe like with the check printing example, maybe you run payroll twice monthly, and on those 2 pay dates, you're gonna actually have somebody physically on site to handle that check printer. It's something to think about. So on-site required doesn't necessarily mean 100%. It could be 2 days a month. This person has to be on site, and you understand it. And then, are they capable? It's hard to believe that people today wouldn't be able to access the internet from home, but it's a fact. It's not 100% out there that people have home-based broadband access and things like that. Some people have access to the internet only on their phones, and that may or may not be something that would work for your organization. Go and think about what level of risk if this happens, but the big thing is write it down. Go through, get in a room, bring in the right people, have a conversation, and capture this information, because you're going to need it now, and then you're going to want it in the future. When the disruption goes down, you're going to want to be able to build on So similarly, what if there are people that just quite simply are going to be irreplaceable? Um, um, some of the other information that I have together, I talk a little bit about this, is that you have to assume that people working from home are not going to be as efficient. If they're accustomed to working in an office situation, they're not going to be as efficient at home as they would be in an office. And you have to think about that. What's that gonna do? And then there are other people. You know what? If someone finds themselves in a situation where they need to care for other family members and that sort of thing, you know what? They're not going to be focused on keeping the business going, rightfully so. And so you need to identify who are these people. If you have 4 people doing a job, then you have redundancy. If you have 1 person doing a job, then you need to be thinking about, well, what do we do if that person is going to be temporarily unavailable at all? Similarly, risks. I talked about that just a minute ago. All these systems that you're thinking about, and using the example of Zoom or GoToMeeting or some of those sorts of things that are allowing for collaborative remote work, you need to pull out your contract and get it taken care of. If that contract is going to expire, next month, and y'all been negotiating for a good deal, well, now's the time to go and figure out what you're going to do. Either extend it or move to another vendor, whatever the case might be. But for all your systems, you need to do that. You need to understand, are there capacity limitations? Did you sign up for a service that assumes that there's a level of access that's, it's 5 people, and now all of a sudden you're putting, 105 on it. So think about that. Operational, we've talked about that, but some of the things like, how do you deal with your mail, billing statements? I've been using printed checks as an example throughout, but those are things that you need to think about from an operational standpoint. Hopefully that process will be of value to you as you go back and start to think about, how do you deal with this right now? And we all find ourselves in a strange situation. And I mentioned at the beginning of this that ERPA, I feel actually quite proud that we viewed this and we said, you know what, there are people out there that need help, and it's in a different sort of scenario than we would normally do. And so a decision was made all the way at the top of the company that, if you need help, come to us, we're going to help you. And we came up with, we call it keeping the lights on. And so we're not going to help not gratis. We're not going to help you go and do a new implementation or something like that of your systems or things like that. But if you find as an organization that y'all need help making sure that your systems can take care of your population and you're not prepared for that, give us a call. We're going to do our best to help you. And it's really about, quote unquote, keeping the lights on. So it's, again, it's not to go out there and advance the state of the art, but there are really people out there that are not prepared, and they need help, and what they don't need is a lot of the noise that may come around, getting help. Right now, it's about delivering help. So you can read this, and we have information on our website about it. It's no obligation, it's no cost. You just have to reach out, let us know you need help, and then we'll figure out how to do that. So I hope that if you find yourself in a difficult time, that you'll avail us of that opportunity to reach out and help you. I have to put the legal disclaimer. If you're out there and you're our competitor and you want us to provide services to to your clients and things like that, well, you know what, we're going to tell you no. But it is something that we plan to offer fully to anybody that asks. And while business continuity is something that we do with more of our business consulting side, it's not really a part of that keeping the lights on directly, which is uh, it just falls a little bit over to the side. If anybody has felt spurred to action by this webinar, and you think that you could get some value out of bouncing ideas off of me, or or me doing something else to help you out, please reach out. My contact information is at the top. And again, this is something that we would like to provide to the community at large, gratis. So if we can help you, we would like to do it. So there's a poll that's up. If you're interested in in any of this, answer the poll. I don't know if the poll captures who you are. So to be on the safe side, I think you should reach out to our website. You can email me personally, and I'll connect you with the right people, whatever the case might be. So business continuity, kind of to wrap it up, is really much more about a process. It's much more about thinking about what are the possibilities and what are the problems associated with dealing with issues that will keep your business viable. And I've intentionally used that word, enough that probably some of you are sick of hearing it, but it's important, and that starts the entire exercise. And what you don't want to do is make a mistake about not defining that correctly, and then getting through the disruption and finding that the organization is not in a position to carry forward after this. Because I do think that once we get our hands around this, me personally, I think that things are going to come roaring back, and we all want to be in a position to take advantage of that. So I had mentioned that this is not a typical webinar where we try and sell you something. Quite differently, we're looking to try and help. Hopefully this has been of some benefit. Here's that slide I mentioned that tells a little bit about who we are if you don't know who we are. This slide deck will be available if you would like it, if there's information. And like I said, we're also available as needed to help you in any way. And then I would be remiss, we are a business. If you have needs that are beyond what we've talked about, we would love for you to reach out and establish a relationship with you in that regard too. So I don't know if there have been any questions that have popped up during the presentation, Vishal or Kieran.
Yeah, Bill, I am not seeing any questions at this point.
Okay, so I'll leave it. I'll leave the presentation up through the remainder of the hour. If you do have a question, and you can pop that out, and I'll do my best to answer it, and then we'll wrap up. We'll wrap up on the hour. If you have questions that you would rather reach out to us directly, obviously feel free to do so. But that's the end of what I have prepared to present. Thanks, everybody.
Bill, there is one question. What's the email address to reach out to you to request the complimentary service?
Yeah, let me, I'll put that up.
Okay.
So hopefully you can see that on your screen now. If you can use that email address. Also, if you go to our website, you can find ways to contact us also.
Another question that I see is, I see 3 handouts in the handout section: the complimentary, contingency, and comprehensive service. What is contingency?
Contingency is a level of service that, to be honest with you, we started off with contingency, which was a targeted, discounted package of services that is able to take care of your business, particularly around ERP systems. Take care of the needs of that in a broad way for a limited amount of time. It's for a period of 6 months. That's not complimentary. But if you have a situation if you have a situation where you have staff in place, but they need some help, then in all likelihood we can help you with our complimentary service. If you have concerns that you don't really have the staff to be able to back you up on that, then you probably it would probably benefit you to look at the contingency services, or even higher level processes. One of the things that we've been very concerned about is we certainly don't want people to view that we are in any way trying to capitalize off of this situation. So that's why I intentionally didn't go down and describe those offerings. But certainly we are a business that does that, if that's something that would make sense for you.
Yeah, they replied, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Yeah, Bill, there's another question. Is this service provided for businesses that are solely for PeopleSoft and or Oracle?
That's all that we have set up. If you have a different scenario, reach out to us. We'll see what we can do to help you. We do have, the slide talking about it. We have more than 500 consultants, and we support business systems that are a lot broader than just Oracle PeopleSoft. That's something that we focus on, and so we talk a lot about that. I would suggest that you ask the question, and let us, we're going to be honest with you. We can either help you or we can't. But if you don't ask the question, we won't be able to determine that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else coming through?
No.
Okay. Well, guys, I appreciate everybody's time. I still see a lot of people hanging in right now as well, which hopefully you found some of this beneficial. If you need something to help sort of fill in some of the gaps, it's often it's a bit strange on a webinar, basically talking to myself. I'm more used to talking across to other people, and so I can't read the room, so to speak, to know if I'm hitting the right spots or answering the right questions. But reach out, let us know if we can help you. Obviously my email is there. If you want to reach out directly to me, I'm more than willing to pick up your questions and see what I can do to help. Take care of yourself out there. Figure this out, and let's all collectively keep our fingers crossed that this disruption will be going away in the near future. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Bill.